My wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and for exactly 47 minutes, it was. The flowers were white roses and baby's breath, just like I had always imagined. The venue was a restored colonial estate in Newport, Rhode Island, the kind of place that smelled like old wood and history and quiet money. Luke looked at me from the altar with the kind of eyes that made you believe the world was fundamentally good. My dress was ivory silk, and when I walked down the aisle, I felt, for the first time in my 29 years, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Then my grandfather slipped something into my hand. Grandpa Samuel was 81 years old, barely 5'6" in his wedding shoes, with white hair as soft as cotton and hands that trembled slightly when he held things. He pressed the little book into my palm during the reception, right before the toast began, and he squeezed my fingers around it without saying a word. He just looked at me with those watery blue eyes and smiled the way he always smiled at me, like I was the only person in the room who truly understood him. I didn't even open it before my father noticed. Richard Mercer had a talent for noticing things that didn't belong to him. He was already 3 glasses into a bottle of Moet when he glided across the dance floor toward me, his tuxedo perfectly pressed, his smile the kind that never quite reached his eyes. He took the passbook from my hands before I could even react. He turned it over once. He looked at the old, yellowed cover. And then he walked to the microphone like he owned the stage, which, of course, he believed he did. "Folks," he said, holding the passbook up in the air like a piece of evidence, "my father-in-law, God bless him, has just given my daughter a wedding gift." The room went quiet. 200 people looked up from their champagne flutes. "A passbook," Richard continued, his voice rich with theatrical amusement, "from First National Bank, circa 1982. Laughter rippled through the crowd, the gentle, uncertain kind, the kind people produce when they're not sure if they're supposed to laugh, but the man holding the microphone clearly expects them to. "Trash," Richard said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur that the microphone carried to every corner of the room. "Belongs with trash." And then he dropped it, not handed it back, not set it down, dropped it, straight into the silver bucket of melting ice and champagne standing at the edge of the head table. The laughter that followed was real that time, loud and bright and cruel. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't look at my grandfather's face because I knew if I did, I would fall apart, and I had spent my entire childhood learning how to not fall apart in front of Richard Mercer. Instead, I crossed the room in 6 steps, plunged my hand into the freezing water, and pulled the little book out. The pages were already soaked, the cover warping at the edges, champagne seeping into the binding. I tucked it against my chest, ruining my dress, and I walked out of the ballroom without looking back. Luke found me in the garden 10 minutes later, sitting on a stone bench with the passbook in my lap and my hands shaking from the cold. He didn't say anything. He just sat beside me, took off his jacket, and put it around my shoulders. "Whatever's in there," he said quietly, "belongs to you." 3 days later, I walked into the First National Bank on a Tuesday morning. The lobby was all marble floors and hushed, air-conditioned silence, the kind of place that made you feel slightly underdressed no matter what you were wearing. I was in my thrifted wool coat, holding the passbook inside a plastic Ziploc bag. The pages were crinkled and champagne-stained, swollen with water damage. They looked exactly like what my father had called them. The teller was a young woman, maybe 20 years old, with a neat bun and a polite, practiced smile. She picked up the Ziploc bag with 2 fingers, the faintest wrinkle crossing her nose as she looked at the state of it. "I need to check the balance on this account," I said. "It was a gift from my grandfather." She typed in the account number. Her fingers moved automatically at first, routine data entry, the kind of motion that becomes muscle memory when you spend 8 hours a day behind a keyboard. And then they stopped. She leaned forward almost imperceptibly. Her eyes moved across the screen once, then again. The color in her face shifted, a slow, visible draining, like someone had quietly turned down the light behind her skin. "Ma'am," she said. Her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "Please wait right here. Please don't leave." She picked up a phone. I couldn't hear what she said. Within 40 seconds, two men in suits were walking toward me with the particular kind of measured urgency that people use when they want to move quickly without appearing to run. The taller one was the branch manager. The other, introduced to me moments later, was the regional director. Neither of them looked at my coat. Neither of them looked at the battered plastic bag. They looked at me like I was someone they had been expecting for a very long time and were slightly overwhelmed to finally see. "Miss Mercer," the regional director said, "please, come with us." They took me through a heavy steel door at the back of the branch, down a short corridor that smelled of old paper and climate-controlled air, and into a private viewing room with a leather chair and a mahogany table. They asked if I wanted water. I said no. They excused themselves to retrieve the account file. I sat alone in that room, and the silence pressed in around me, and I found myself somewhere else entirely. I was 12 years old, kneeling on the hardwood floor of my father's study. Richard sat in his armchair by the window, legs crossed, swirling a glass of scotch. He had knocked it over 20 minutes earlier. I wasn't certain it was on purpose. I never was. But the rule in our house was simple and unspoken. Girls clean, boys conquer. My brother Hunter was on the sofa, 14 years old and completely uninterested, his feet propped on the table I had just polished, his eyes fixed on a video game. He hadn't looked up once. "You missed a spot, Alyssa," Richard said softly. He never yelled. He had no need to yell. The softness was the point, the careful, deliberate quietness of a man who understood that cruelty is most effective when it is delivered in a tone that forces you to question your own perception of it. When you yell, people know you're cruel. When you're gentle and smiling and utterly unmoved by the person on the floor in front of you, they start to wonder if maybe they're the problem. My grandfather had come into the room while I was scrubbing. He had reached down to help me up. He had barely touched my elbow before Richard's voice cut across the room like a blade. "Touch that rag, old man, and I'll have you in a state facility so fast you won't have time to pack your medication." Grandpa Samuel stood very still for a moment. Then he looked at me with those blue eyes of his, and the apology in them was heavier than anything he could have said out loud. He left the room. I kept scrubbing. I scrubbed until my knuckles bled. I scrubbed because at 12 years old, I had already absorbed the lesson my father was so determined to teach me, that I had no value beyond what I could endure, that I was background, that I was furniture, that the best I could hope for was to be invisible enough that Richard's attention moved on to something else. The vault door clanked open behind me, and I was back in the leather chair. The regional director placed a thick file on the table and turned the document toward me. His voice was careful, professionally measured, but there was something underneath it that might have been reverence. "Your grandfather didn't just open a savings account, Miss Mercer. In 1982, he established what's called a Taunton Trust, a payable-on-death account that transfers automatically to a named beneficiary without going through probate. He was an early investor in Apple and Microsoft. He funneled every dividend back into the portfolio for 40 years. He never touched the principal." He turned the page so I could see the number. The current value, $12,400,000. I looked at it for a long time. $12,400,000. I thought about the champagne bucket. I thought about my father's voice into the microphone, that easy, dismissive laugh, the way the room had laughed with him. He had held $12 million in his hand and thrown it away because he was too proud to look at what it was. "Is there anyone else listed on the account?" I asked. My voice was steady, clinical. I had spent 10 years as a trauma nurse, and one of the things that job teaches you is how to keep your voice steady when the numbers on the monitor are very bad. "No," the director said. "It's solely in your name. It is entirely yours." I pressed my fingertips against the ruined cover of the passbook. It wasn't just money sitting in that account. It was a 40-year act of love from a man who had known, perhaps better than anyone, what I would one day need. And it was something else, too. Something that clarified in my mind with cold precision as I sat in that chair. It was a weapon. And I knew exactly how to use it. Luke was still awake when I got home. Our apartment was small and warm, the kitchen island buried under spreadsheets and his open laptop. Luke isn't a flashy person. He doesn't have Richard's presence or Hunter's easy confidence. What he has is a particular kind of mind, methodical, patient, relentless, and a forensic accountant's ability to find the cracks in the foundation that everyone else walks right over. He'd been doing that work for weeks, quietly, without telling me how bad it was until he was certain. He turned the laptop screen toward me as I walked through the door. "It's not an empire," he said. His voice was flat and factual, the way it gets when he's already processed the emotion and moved past it to the problem. "It's a Ponzi scheme built on bridge loans and ego. He's insolvent." The numbers on the screen told a story that bore no resemblance to the one Richard had been narrating for 30 years. The Newport mansion had entered foreclosure proceedings 3 weeks earlier. The family trust he referenced at every charity dinner, the one he managed with such theatrical gravitas, was empty. He had been cycling the same $50,000 between 6 shell companies to manufacture the appearance of liquidity. And on top of all of it, the IRS had issued a notice of deficiency the previous month. He was being audited. My phone rang before I had finished processing it. The name on the screen was a single word: Dad. I put it on speaker. Luke stopped typing. Richard's voice filled our kitchen without preamble, without greeting, carrying the brash, untroubled confidence of a man who still believed the world arranged itself around him. "Alyssa, I've been thinking about that cottage your grandfather left you." Samuel had left me a small property on the Rhode Island coast, a modest, somewhat run-down cottage worth perhaps $300,000, peanuts to a real estate developer, a potential lifeline to a drowning man. "I'm going to do you a favor," he said. "I've spoken to my attorney. We can liquidate it quickly, get you a fair price, and invest the proceeds into the family business so you actually see a return. You're a nurse, honey. Property taxes, maintenance, the legal complexity of coastal real estate. It's not your world. I'm trying to protect you from a headache." "I'm not selling," I said. The pause that followed was very brief. Then the performance ended. "You listen to me," he said, and his voice had dropped into that other register, the private one, the one he only used when the audience was gone and there was no one to perform for. "That old man was mentally incompetent when he signed that deed. I have witnesses who will testify that you manipulated a senile geriatric into signing over family assets. If you don't have transfer paperwork on my desk by Friday, I will pursue you for elder abuse in probate court until there is nothing left. Do you understand me? You are completely out of your depth." I said I understood. I thanked him. I told him I'd think about it. The line went dead. Luke was smiling, not warmly. It was the quiet, cold smile of a man who has just watched someone hand him exactly the tools he needs. "He's desperate," I said. "Desperate men don't read fine print," Luke said. I waited 24 hours before calling him back. Silence is a pressure system. It lets desperation build to the point where it overwhelms caution. Luke and I spent that day not in panic, but in preparation. Careful, deliberate, methodical preparation. We reached out to a specific kind of attorney. We assembled documents. We had a very detailed conversation about exactly what we were going to do and how. When I finally dialed, I put away the woman who had walked out of the bank vault and summoned someone else. I summoned the girl from the hardwood floor. I let my voice find the tremor it had spent 17 years learning to suppress. "Dad," I said when he picked up. "I'm sorry about the other night. I didn't know what to say." His voice softened almost immediately, not from affection, but from strategy. A frightened daughter was useful to him, a compliant one even more so. "That's all right, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" I told him about the bank. I told him the passbook wasn't empty. I told him the number, $12,400,000. And I let my voice break with convincing anxiety around the words federal audit and capital gains and IRS. I told him I was terrified that if the tax authorities found out I had inherited this much, they would take half. I told him I didn't know how to protect it. I handed him the exact thing he needed to hear. I made it his idea. His transformation was instant and complete. The bully became a benefactor. The predator became a protector. His voice took on that warm, authoritative steadiness that I recognized from 100 family dinners. The tone he used when he wanted you to believe he was the only adult in the room. "Listen to me very carefully," he said. "Do not sign anything with the bank. Do not speak to any attorneys. You bring those documents directly to me. I can shelter the assets under the family trust, classify them as pre-existing holdings. It's complex, but I can make the tax liability disappear. I'm doing this for you, to protect you." "Can we do it soon?" I asked, allowing just the right amount of desperate gratitude into my voice. He had the Man of the Year charity gala at the Fairmont Copley Plaza in Boston on Saturday. "Perfect timing," he said. "Bring the documents to the VIP suite before the speeches. He would have his attorneys draw up the transfer paperwork. He would sign everything, announce the expansion of the family foundation, make it all look clean and legitimate and triumphant." He wanted an audience. He wanted to announce a $12 million windfall as evidence of his own genius. He wanted the applause. "That's what fathers are for," he said. I thanked him. I told him I didn't know what I would do without him. I hung up and looked at Luke across the kitchen island. "He took it," I said. Luke was already printing the documents. The Fairmont Copley Plaza was built in 1912, and it has the bones of a place that was constructed to impress people who were already impressed with themselves. Vaulted ceilings, crystal chandeliers, marble floors that catch the light and throw it back at you. Boston's elite filled the grand ballroom in black tie, moving through the kind of easy, expensive warmth that comes from spending your entire life in rooms just like this one. I arrived at 7:55 in an off-the-shoulder red dress that I had bought that afternoon without apologizing for the price. I walked through the crowd, not around it. Hunter was at the bar, already several drinks in, laughing at something with a cluster of people I didn't recognize. He didn't see me. Richard was near the stage, flanked by 2 state senators, radiating the glow of a man who believed he had just engineered his own salvation. When he spotted me crossing the room, his expression remained perfectly pleasant for the benefit of the cameras. Only his eyes shifted. He excused himself and met me at the edge of the stage. "You're late," he said quietly, his smile fixed in place. "Do you have the documents?" "I have them," I said. I held out the blue leather presentation folder. He took it from my hand with barely suppressed urgency and opened it right there. He didn't read the clauses. He didn't study the appendix. He looked for the signature line the way a drowning man looks for something to grab, with total, single-minded focus, incapable of noticing anything else. A careful man would have read the title, Affidavit of Historical Management and Sole Liability. A careful man would have noticed that the dates in the body of the document stretched back 20 years, retroactively linking the signatory to a list of offshore entities that occupied 3 full pages of appendix. A careful man would have asked why a document about accepting a $12 million inheritance contained the phrase unreported foreign account holdings in the definitions section. Richard Mercer was not a careful man. He was an arrogant one. He pulled a Mont Blanc pen from his jacket pocket, scrawled his signature with the practiced flourish of someone who signs his name the way other people make speeches, and handed the folder back to me without reading a single word. "Go find a seat somewhere in the back," he said, already turning toward the stage. "I have an announcement to make." I didn't go to the back. I moved to the side of the room, photographed the signed page, and sent it to Luke. 3 miles away, he attached it to the whistleblower complaint we had finalized 4 days earlier and uploaded it to the Department of Justice secure reporting portal. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division had been briefed. The referral was complete. Richard took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice rolling through the ballroom with practiced, easy authority. "Tonight we announce the historic expansion of the Mercer Family Foundation, a $12 million investment in this city's future." In front of 500 witnesses, he claimed ownership of assets he had just signed an affidavit accepting personal liability for. He linked himself, in his own words, in front of cameras and journalists and state senators, to every number in that appendix. He was reading his own indictment. My phone buzzed. A message from Luke. Received. IRS confirmation code 99 Alpha. It's done. Behind Richard, the 60-foot LED screen that had been displaying the foundation logo flickered once. The logo vanished. In its place, a Department of Justice seal appeared, stamped in red letters 3 feet high. Federal Asset Seizure in Progress, case number 8842. The applause collapsed. The room went utterly, completely silent. Richard turned to look at the screen. His face moved through a sequence of expressions: confusion, then a dawning, horrified comprehension, then the specific blankness of a man whose mind refuses to accept the information in front of it. The ballroom doors opened. 6 IRS criminal investigation agents came down the aisle in a formation that left no room for interpretation. "Richard Mercer." The lead agent's voice was completely without drama. "Step away from the podium." "Do you know who I am?" Richard said. He still had the microphone. "We do," the agent said. "You're the sole trustee who just signed an affidavit accepting personal liability for 20 years of unreported offshore accounts." Richard spun around. He found me across the room. "She tricked me," he said. "My own daughter. Save it for the grand jury." The handcuffs made a sound I will remember for a very long time. Not loud, just final. I thought it was over. The VIP suite door slammed behind me. The lock clicked. Hunter was standing in the center of the room, sweating through his shirt, his face a deep, mottled red. The composed facade he had been maintaining all evening had collapsed entirely, leaving something rawer and more frightened underneath. "You ruined everything," he said. "It was already ruined," I told him. "The money was never real. There was nothing to ruin." What happened next was not strategy. It was not calculation. It was the thing that comes after the plan runs out. Pure, cornered instinct. Hunter grabbed a serrated steak knife from the service tray on the table. Luke stepped in front of me before I had time to react. He said Hunter's name, once, calmly, like a man who has already decided how this ends. Hunter lunged. Luke caught his wrist and twisted with a clinical efficiency that I recognized, from my years in the trauma bay, as the movement of someone who had trained for exactly this situation. The knife skidded across the marble. When the agents forced the door open 20 seconds later, Hunter was on the floor, not from the pain in his arm, but from something older and more complete. The grief of a man who has just understood, all at once, that everything he thought he was inheriting doesn't exist. That was 3 weeks ago. This morning, Newport smells like salt water and coffee, and the particular, specific quiet that comes after a very long storm finally passes. I'm sitting on the porch of my cottage. My cottage. I've replaced the roof shingles, cleared decades of ivy from the east wall, painted the trim a soft white that catches the morning light. Richard was denied bail. His assets are frozen. His empire, built on paper and ego and fear, is being dismantled by federal auditors who do not care about his name. Hunter took a plea agreement. There is no inheritance waiting for him on the other side of it. Only the ordinary, unpretentious work of building something real. Luke is sitting beside me with his own coffee, watching the water. The trust transfer completed 4 days ago. $12,400,000, quietly, legally, permanently mine. "So," Luke says, looking out at the Atlantic, "what do you want to do with it?" I think about that for a moment. I think about the bank vault and the marble lobby and the teller's face going pale. I think about a little girl on a hardwood floor, scrubbing until her knuckles bled, being told she had no value beyond what she could endure. I think about an 81-year-old man pressing a battered book into my hand at my wedding and squeezing my fingers around it without saying a word. He knew. He always knew. Nothing, I say. Let it grow. I'm still a nurse. I'm still Alyssa. The money isn't who I am. It was never supposed to make me someone different. It was supposed to make me safe. It was supposed to mean that no one, not a father, not a brother, not anyone, could ever again stand over me with a microphone and call me trash. Samuel Mercer was a quiet man his whole life. He never raised his voice. He never sat at the head of any table. He invested in Apple in 1982 when the world still thought it was a gamble, and he funneled every dividend back into the account untouched for 40 years for a granddaughter he believed in when no one else bothered to look. He didn't leave me money. He left me a foundation. Family isn't the people who share your blood. It isn't the names on the documents or the seats at the table or the voices at the microphone. Family is who stands with you when the vault opens and the number on the page is real, and the question isn't, what do you have? It's, what do you want to build? Luke refills my coffee without being asked. The ocean doesn't care about any of it. It just keeps moving, steady and enormous, the way it always has. I let it.